Man, Capcom, if you're watching this right now, hook me up in the future. I love Resident Evil, I promise. Just look at my channel. Anyway, what's up, nerds, and welcome to another episode of Nerdspace Games. On today's episode, we're taking a look at the gameplay reveal of Resident Evil Requiem. Now, full disclosure, I did not attend Gamescom, nor was I chosen to receive any exclusive gameplay footage from Capcom. Everything I'm about to break down is courtesy of the YouTube channel GameSpot, who dropped a full no commentary gameplay reveal of Resident Evil Requiem, so be sure to head over to their channel and subscribe and check out their video. Anyway, without further ado, let's jump into some Resident Evil 9 gameplay, guys. So we start off with some familiar footage as we see Grace Ashcroft strapped down, upside down, with someone draining her blood. Can I just say right away that this game just looks beautiful? I mean, I don't mean Grace looks beautiful. Well, she does, but I mean the graphics and the visuals. Damn it, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, just look at her hair and the sweat, and I totally just realized how creepy that sounds. Moving on, as I said, she's having her blood drained, and like I've said multiple times, this is probably in regards to the antibodies that she carries from the Daylight vaccine. Cliff Notes version, as I'm sure you guys have heard this multiple times by now, but at the end of one of the outbreak scenarios, Alyssa and the rest of the survivors create and inject themselves with a cure to rid them of the T-virus called the Daylight vaccine. Mine, along with just about everybody's theory, is that the Daylight vaccine will play a key part in this game, and since Grace is the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft, one of the survivors of the outbreak games, she probably had the antibodies passed on to her courtesy of her mother. Going back to the footage, we see Grace showcase how crafty and intelligent she is as she breaks the vial containing her blood to use as a sheath to cut her restraints and free herself. After freeing herself, we hear her say this line.
What did it do to me?
Okay, so honestly, not much there, but this does confirm that Grace is aware of who kidnapped her, or at the very least, she knows it's a guy, which means she wasn't attacked from behind. More than likely, it's probably the same hooded figure that we saw in the trailer, or maybe she's referring to the man in the chair. The gameplay footage was captured in both first person and third person at different points in the game. After moving around a little following the cutscene, we immediately realized that we're in the same area as one of the screenshots we've seen earlier this summer, which is a well-lit room, of course. The first thing that the player does is examine a file which mentions a drug called Dexafil, which was administered to Grace. From what my sources say, sources being Google of course, this drug is basically pain medicine. Another key thing about what I wanted to point out that a lot of people haven't really been talking about up until this point is the fact that you can turn on and off the lamps. Now, this is a much bigger deal than it sounds, but we'll talk more about that later when we get to the stalker enemy. After leaving the room, Grace finds an empty bottle, and similar to Revelations 2, we'll see that later in the footage that these empty bottles are used to stun or distract the hag. Fast forward through a lot of dark hallways in which Grace will need to turn on some lights, we find, in true Resident Evil fashion, a fuse box next to an elevator, which of course is missing the fuse. After we retrieve a key nearby, it's at this point where we start to hear sounds of something moving around in the hospital, in the walls, and in the ceiling. Actually, these sounds kind of remind me of the xenomorph moving around in the vents in the space station of Alien Isolation, and there's even more similarities to that game that we'll talk about later on in today's video. Anyway, we eventually find ourselves in another well-lit room, and most importantly, there's an ink ribbon container in this room. Now, I assume this is a placeholder for actual ink ribbons, but since this is a demo, they were replaced with these empty containers. This is great news, by the way, as limited saves is something I've always appreciated in my survival horror games, and when you think about it, excluding remakes and the Madhouse difficulty of RE7, we haven't seen limited saving for Resident Evil since, God, RE0, I think? Is that true? Someone fact check that for me, because if that is true, then that's actually kind of fucking nuts. Of course, our girl Grace eventually finds the lighter that we've seen in the trailers before, and the infamous fuse we've been looking for. Well, that was easy. Oh wait, we need to unscrew it first. Figures. Small note though, the inventory system, including the shortcut menu, screams Resident Evil 7, which is to be expected considering that the director of this game directed RE7, so that's really not too shocking. Anyways, after obtaining the lighter, we make our way through some familiar hallways again, only this time the lights are out, meaning that Grace's lighter is her only light source during this time. Ooh, spooky. This of course ends, as you would expect, in a jump scare and our first really good look at the stalker enemy of this section of the game, the hag. Before that though, looking at the body and hearing what Grace says, we learn that this individual was infected. Now, he doesn't appear to be a zombie though, but he does look very similar to the cop that we saw in the original reveal trailer. Also, Grace immediately recognizes that he's infected, which tells us that by this point of the game, she's probably already confronted other infected people, either in the present or during her time in Redwood Hotel in the flashback flashback sequence. Anyways, at this point, one of the most terrifying things I've ever seen happens as we see the hag stretch out in front of Grace to grab the body and literally devour the hell out of him. So lots of things to talk about here as we get our first look at the hag. First off, I don't see how people that saw this back at Summer Game Fest thought this was Lisa Trevor. Nothing about this stalker enemy reminds me of Lisa Trevor, except that she makes maybe similar sounds as Lisa Trevor, sort of. No, I think that theory is out the window for me. In fact, I'm actually now more on board for a different theory, despite what I said in my breakdown of the Gamescom trailer yesterday. This actually screams Alyssa Ashcroft. The hair is what actually gives it away for me, but even the shape of her now deformed face sort of kind of reminds me of Alyssa. Am I imagining that? Whatever. Finally, the encounter with the hag and her eyes specifically are kind of interesting. The fact that she reached past Grace and ignored her at first, for example, instead of going straight for her is one weird thing. I mean, is she blind? Her eyes do kind of point that way. Actually, on the note of her eyes, this is where a previous theory of mine comes into play. About a month ago, when we were getting all of those updates on Resident Evil Requiem, I posted a short YouTube video pointing out the fact that I believe the hag is sensitive to light and that she can't go into well-lit rooms. In my opinion, this is how save rooms would be established during this section of the game. Funny enough, this theory was finally officially confirmed when Grace makes her way into one of these well-lit rooms and the hag follows her only to be burned and forced to retreat from the light. Yeah, so honestly, I'm not normally right when it comes to theories, so this actually kind of feels awesome to know that I got something right about a month ago. Okay, humble brag aside, the hag retreats into the ceiling in the same way the xenomorph escapes into the vents after being warded off in alien isolation. Moving down the hallway a little more, we get a look at what the healing items of the game look like: med injectors. I don't know if this is the only form of healing, as I've also heard people mention herbs, but I haven't seen any of them in any of the footage so far, but this item appears to heal your health completely, and usually there's some sort of lesser healing item in Resident Evil games, but this is all we got for now. Anyway, we eventually find the screwdriver that we need, and at this point, the chase is on. The hag will then relentlessly pursue Grace from bursting through walls in true Mr. X fashion to dropping from the ceiling like the xenomorph. The hag appears to be one adaptable and formidable stalker enemy as she combines all the elements of the scariest and most dangerous stalker enemies in all horror games. Side note, I love the mechanic of Grace falling over as she's running in third person. This doesn't appear to happen in first person, which honestly kind of makes me want to play this game in third person now, but regardless, I think this feature does multiple things. One, it showcases how scared she is, and it really shows that she still kind of suffers from anxiety. Two, it adds tension and realism to the encounter with the stalker enemy. And three, it makes it way more terrifying as the hag is able to catch up to Grace easier this way, making the hag even more dangerous. Yeah, I hope this is something that builds over time as we play as Grace to kind of show us her journey. Honestly, I do think that will happen considering the fact that this footage appears to be very, very early in the game as Grace doesn't have a gun yet, and we know she eventually gets one because of sequences we saw earlier this summer. Oh, and don't get caught by the hag because otherwise she'll take a massive, massive chunk out of you. But that's all I got for the gameplay reveal of Resident Evil Requiem. Again, I want to thank all the creators covering the gameplay right now as I'm unfortunately unable to make it out to Gamescom this year, so massive thank you to people like JJ with Resident Evil and GameSpot for making these gameplay breakdown videos possible to do for you guys. Definitely go and subscribe to their channels and show them some love. But with that said, what do you guys think about the gameplay reveal? After seeing what you just saw, will you be playing in first person or third person? Let me know your thoughts down below. But thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerd Space Games. Take care.